Hey gang, it's Squill, and this video contains spoilers for the Mario movie. You have been warned. Anyways, this film was definitely a long time coming for Mario fans such as myself, so I definitely wanted to share my thoughts on it in video form. This film was very controversial prior to the first trailer releasing. This is partially due to the voice cast being, let's just say controversial, but also partially because it was being helmed by Illumination, a studio infamous for not necessarily making bad movies, but very safe, very generic animated kids films. I haven't seen all of their films personally, but I'm definitely familiar enough with them through just having a ton of little cousins. You guys have no idea how many times I've seen Sing. Like, if I catch this movie one more time, I'm gonna explode. But with Shigeru Miyamoto having a ton of creative input, there was definitely still hope that the movie would turn out good. And against all odds, the trailers looked actually good. People could see just how much love and care was put into this movie. Not some magnum opus by any means, but a good, solid Mario film. But then those initial reviews dropped and things got kinda iffy again. A lot of critics, particularly those on Rotten Tomatoes, started giving the film mid to low scores, and people got angry at this. And like, I don't get it. I don't know, it just seems very silly to me to care this much about what critics have to say about the funny Wahoo movie. Hey, here's a tip. How about instead of attacking critics for not liking a kids movie, we just watch the movie ourselves and form our own opinion and let other people have their opinions because it's a movie and it's not that serious. But speaking of which, how did I feel about the Mario movie? Well, personally, I loved it. I definitely have a few nitpicks here and there that I plan to get into. But as a whole, this was one of the funnest experiences I've ever had in a movie theater. It was an excellent watch. I think the first thing that really stands out to me as a Mario movie is the level of world building here. Because the Mario games have never really had consistent world building. It's always just been a bunch of disconnected levels, which works for a video game, but in the context of a movie, it'd be a little awkward. And so I love that the movie puts in a good effort to try and connect all of these different locations. And not only that, but it acts as an origin story for the Mario Bros, confirming that they used to live in Brooklyn. They managed to contextualize Mario Kart, which is really cool. I love that they incorporated DK Island and the cons into this movie. The Donkey Kong Country games have always felt very disconnected from the rest of the Mario universe, so this was definitely appreciated by me. And you can just tell that the crew behind this movie absolutely loves Mario. There were so many little references, not just to Mario games, but to Nintendo as a whole. The OST especially just goes so hard. There are so many Mario songs in the soundtrack, it's unreal. I gotta give an extra special shout out to the usage of the DK rap when Donkey Kong is introduced. Possibly the greatest video game song ever conceived. Though it's definitely a huge bummer that the song's composer, Grant Kirkhope, was not credited. The man absolutely deserves recognition as one of the greatest video game composers of all time. And on a similarly downer note, I wasn't a huge fan of the usage of pop music here. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the songs themselves, and I appreciated that most of them were from the 80s, but they still kinda fell out of place and weren't really necessary. Also, Shrek 2 easily has the better usage of Holding Out for a Hero, but I feel like that goes without saying. Needless to say, this movie looks absolutely gorgeous. All of the colors just pop, it's easily the best looking Illumination film. And this movie is surprisingly really funny too. It got so many good laughs out of me, and there really weren't any groaners either. Now, in terms of the actual story, it's definitely not something to write home about. It's a fairly standard Mario adventure with not a ton of crazy twists, but it's definitely elevated for me with the amount of cool set pieces and world building, as well as just by how much I enjoyed the characters. I did find the pacing to be a little weird though. Like, they definitely sort of yada yada a good chunk of the adventure in the form of a montage, and I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of that decision. It's definitely a very fast-paced movie, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I just feel like we could have gotten maybe 20 more minutes, just for a bit more breathing room. Also, and this isn't the film itself's fault, but I do kind of feel like the trailers were a bit too spoilery. Like, don't get me wrong, there were definitely a good amount of surprises in this movie, but I still feel like the trailers could have cut down on them just a little bit. Now that I've discussed my overall thoughts on the movie, I want to discuss each individual character and what I liked and didn't like about them. Starting with the main man himself, Mario. There was a lot of controversy centered around Chris Pratt's voice as Mario. He really sounded like he was phoning it in the trailers. But in the movie itself, he sounded pretty good. I thought it was a good take on the character. And yeah, I like this portrayal of Mario as a whole, as this sort of adventurous and heroic, but still very ordinary and chill guy. And I like how they show him slowly become more competent over the course of the film. It's a nice little character arc for him. I was definitely also very pleased to see they got Luigi right, since he's one of my favorite Mario characters. Charlie Day does a great job playing up just how much of a scaredy cat he is, which is great since it's a very important aspect of his character. They did a great job building up his brotherly bond with Mario in the first act. Their dynamic was very sweet and believable. Although, I do feel like more could have been done with Luigi in Act 2. He doesn't really do much for the middle portion of the movie, which is a little lame. But he at least got to play an active role with Mario in the climax, so that helped make up for it. I liked Peach in the movie, but I feel like they strayed a bit too far away from her game characterization. Not because they made her badass, that's perfectly fine. And in fact, I think most of the people complaining about it are annoying man-children. Peach has been a heroic character since Mario 2, you guys, calm down. Nah, my problem with Peach is that I feel like they just removed too much of her femininity from the games. Like, she can be cute and girly, but also a badass, you guys. Those aren't mutually exclusive concepts. It reminds me of the way a lot of the female characters are written in the MCU, where they're all stoic and sarcastic and not allowed to express any sort of femininity or even have character flaws. Like, you can really tell they're written by guys who think they're feminists, you know? And Peach definitely doesn't have this as bad as most female MCU characters, but it's still there to some degree. I still did enjoy Peach in the movie. I liked her dynamic with Mario a lot. She's still a good character on her own, just maybe not the best adaptation of Peach. Her backstory was also interesting and definitely could be elaborated upon in future sequels. I like Toad in the movie a lot more than in the games. I think he really worked here as this cute little sidekick to Mario and Peach. I think he could have gotten a bit more dialogue, especially with Mario himself, but I still really enjoyed his inclusion in the film, and I especially love that they sort of make this an origin story for Captain Toad. They even play the Captain Toad theme when he's first introduced. I was super impressed with how they handled Donkey Kong in the movie. I was initially worried they were just gonna do what Smash Bros does and just make him a big angry monkey. But nah, the movie did a great job playing up the fun-loving nature of the character. I love just how much of a show-off they made him. It's super in line with his characterization in the Donkey Kong Country games. And they still make him super strong too, it's not like they nerf him for the sake of comedy. His rivalry with Mario throughout the film was very funny, and I'd overall call him my second favorite character in the movie. You already know who my first is, but I'll get to him in a minute. But first, I want to briefly discuss Cranky Kong, who I thought was easily the weakest character in the film. I don't think his voice was very fitting at all. He sounded way too young to be Cranky Kong. His voice should have sounded older and much more high-pitched. And characterization-wise, he didn't really feel like Cranky Kong to me, just sort of your generic ruler. In the Donkey Kong Country games, he was constantly breaking the fourth wall and complaining about how much better games were back when he was a youngster. So I think it would have been better if, in the movie, instead of complaining about video games, he complained about modern movies. And I get that that type of meta humor is super overdone and annoying nowadays. But I think in this instance it would have been okay, since Cranky would be the only character doing it, and it's in character for him. But the best character in the movie was easily Bowser, hands down. He's able to go from a big, scary villain to this big goofball just like that. He reminded me a lot of Lord Hader in Season 2 of Wander Over Yonder, with just how obsessed he was over Peach while still being a villain. I really enjoyed that he was just entirely motivated by wanting to marry Peach, and his big piano ballad about her had me cackling, easily my favorite scene in the movie. Oh, and Kamek was great too. I really liked his dynamic with Bowser. But yeah, Bowser was easily the highlight of the film for me, and actually his portrayal in this kinda makes me like him more as a character just in general. Like, I'd be willing to call Bowser a top 5 Mario character now. That's how great he was in this movie. Oh, and one more thing, I was a little disappointed that the big post-credits tease was just Yoshi. Like, he's easily the most obvious character to be in a sequel, he was the most important character not in the movie, and we already saw a bunch of Yoshis in the montage, which was already in one of the trailers. Actually, going into the movie, I was already predicting it'd be a Mario Galaxy situation, where he's barely in the first film, but becomes a huge character in the second. And yeah, that seems to be what's happening here. But speaking of which, we can definitely expect a big chunk of the marketing for the sequel to be centered around Yoshi. I'm also expecting Wario and Waluigi to play a major role in the sequel. It'd be really fun to see them act as rivals to Mario and Luigi. I'm not sure if they'll be the only villains or if they'll be goons hired by Bowser, but either way, I hope they're in the movie. I could also see Bowser Jr. and or the Koopalings being the villains, but I feel like they're more of a third film idea. I'm definitely also hoping Luigi gets to join the adventures so we get to see a bit more of him in this one. Hell, maybe they'll introduce Daisy so she and Luigi can get a subplot. And lastly, we'll probably see some sort of elaboration on Peach's backstory. Maybe we see her parents or reveal that she's not actually a human after all. I don't know. But overall, while it's not perfect, I had an absolute blast watching the Mario movie. I had the biggest smile on my face from start to finish with this movie, and even my friends who aren't as into Mario as me still had just as much of a fun time. Please let me know how you feel about the movie and what you want to see in the sequel in the comments. Squill out.